Houston Texans running back Dameon Pierce is the number one running back that you need to be buying in your dynasty leagues right now. We will explain why in this episode of Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. Go follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. Just a little programming note. Kate and I are going to be on all week long. Matt and Ryan have the week off, talking about some rebuilding targets for your dynasty leagues. Today, we are talking about the running back position. And Kate, you and I are absolutely aligned in this one. Tell us why Dameon Pierce is the number one target that you need to be going and trading for right now.
Guys, are you sick, everydayers, of us talking about Dameon Pierce and the endless hype train? Because I'm not. Just FYI, I am not sick of Dameon Pierce and the hype train just yet. We talked about him a bit on our Texans buy, sell, hold episode way back when, over the summer, when we previewed every single NFL team and the dynasty assets we were buying, selling, and holding. So if you haven't, if you're new to the show, please go back, check out that episode series. We went division by division, along with our co-host Matt and Ryan. And, again, we talked a little bit about Dameon Pierce, just FYI, in case you're tripping over your AFC South episode. I mean, Dameon Pierce, just so much to love about what he did in year one among running backs with 50 or more rush attempts. Pierce ranked second in PFF elusive rating, which grades runners based on their performance outside of the offensive line, right? Like, what was Dameon Pierce able to do based on the elements that he could control, making the appropriate reads on the field, making the appropriate, elusive moves,
Making guys miss, right? Like, he's just so good in that area.
Can he force missed tackles? Yes. Like, that is can he generate yards after contact?
Absolutely.
The answer is yes. Averaged 17 rush attempts in his rookie season. That ranked 14th in the league. 62 missed forced tackles on rush attempts, which ranked 4th in the league, despite the fact that, Marcus, he only played 13 games. Now, this team didn't draft a single running back in the NFL draft. You have Rex Burkhead, who's on his way out. And Marcus, I don't know if you've seen the hype videos out of training camp, but Pierce is looking pretty good. And what you won't see when you look back last year in training camp reports was a lot of him catching the ball. And we've seen some really nice highlight plays of Dameon Pierce catching the ball, which was an area he very much needed to improve.
Yes.
Knowing that they're making what seems like a concerted effort to get him involved as a receiver. He's young. He doesn't have a ton of total touches on the tires. In fact, in Florida, that was his biggest knock. He didn't get a ton of work in college either. So fresh legs for days. What is there not to like about Dameon Pierce if you're in a rebuild mode? I know there's a lot of concerns, I think, generally about the draft capital, but he's not going to be able to change that. So can you get on board with a 4th round running back, just knowing that he's really freaking good? And my answer is yes.
Yes. And there's another reason why I'm even more on board now is because you knew the Texans were going to bring in somebody else to pair with Pierce this offseason, because you can't have him out there for 100% of the snaps. It's ludicrous, right? So the one veteran running back that they brought in was Devin Singletary. And to me, that's a net positive for Dameon Pierce, because they could have done so much better than Devin Singletary. It's not to say that Singletary is a bad player, but the one thing we know for sure about Devin Singletary is he's not a weapon in the passing game. I'm pretty confident that he's a bad receiver. All the metrics when he was with Buffalo suggest that he's just not a good receiver. It's why the Bills went out.
They utilized him as a receiver sometimes, but
he wasn't effective.
Good.
They went out and they drafted James Cook in the 2nd round. That was after they tried to sign J.D. McKissick in free agency. That fell through. And then at the deadline, they went and traded for Nyheim Hines, who was a pass catcher, because I don't think they trusted Devin Singletary at all. To me, that just means that I think if the Texans happen to be in like negative game scripts and they're losing, I think it's going to be Pierce on the field and not Singletary. Singletary might take, I don't know, Kate. Like, I think he's going to be the guy that plays like every third series or every fourth series for Houston. But I think this is Pierce's backfield, and I would be shocked if he doesn't average 16 to 17 touches a game. He averaged 19 touches a game last year. I think it's reasonable to expect that again this season.
Yeah, and you also look at the comparison between Devin Singletary and Dameon Pierce in terms of size, right? Like Devin Singletary, generally speaking, like even coming out of FAU, was able to score touchdowns. Like his size wasn't an issue, right?
No.
At the college level, but when you make it to the pros, suddenly that 5'7", 203-pound build, it feels a little bit different. Now
Yes.
you look at Dameon Pierce, he's definitely got more of the size component that fits more of your prototypical NFL running back, who's going to be able to punch things in along the goal line, 5'10", 218 pounds. I think that generally speaking, like, this isn't going to be the sexiest offense, but I think that the moves that the Houston Texans have made between CJ Stroud, who I definitely think is an upgrade on Davis Mills, the return of John Mechie, the another year of development for Nico Collins,
The offensive line's
Tank
really good
Dell.
too. That's the thing that I get behind. This is not a bad offensive line. Now I know they lost Titus Howard, the right tackle, maybe for week 1, maybe for week 2, but he'll be back. They've got an awesome left tackle in Larry Tunsil. They drafted Kenyon Green in the first round last year. Like, this is conservatively like a top 12 offensive line in the league. There's just so many positives for him. On top of, it doesn't cost you a lot to go out and get him. He's RB20 right now on Dynasty League football. You can trade Joe Mixon for him, who's 27 years old, and maybe get a little bit more back. That's why we love him. If you're in a rebuilding spot, is it doesn't cost a lot to go get him, but there's a lot more upside, especially if this Texans offense happens to be significantly better this year.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to like. Now, in terms of rebuilding, honestly, like, is there any concern that Dameon Pierce might be good enough to shoot you in the foot? Because he is, like, I think from a long-term perspective, he's a great rebuilding target because he is going to provide, I think, value across the next couple of years. And for the upside of that value, you're going to be really happy with that price tag. Is there any concern that Dameon Pierce might be too good for your rebuilding roster?
It's possible, Kate, but at the same time, if I'm trying to acquire Dameon Pierce, it's probably because I'm trying to get off an older running back that's going to be good this year as well. Maybe it's Joe Mixon, maybe it's Derrick Henry. You guys know the names, but I would just rather trade for the youth. And if I happen to take a little bit of hit in production this year, I'm okay with it. I got some quick trades that I want to mention to you before we move on to some of the other running backs. Here's a trade that happened within the last week. Mike Evans for Dameon Pierce, straight up.
Dameon Pierce.
Yeah, I mean, that one's pretty easy. Here's another one. Michael Pittman for Dameon Pierce.
Dameon Pierce.
Yeah. This one's more interesting. Calvin Ridley for Dameon Pierce.
Dameon Pierce.
Yeah. So
and I like Calvin Ridley, but Dameon Pierce, baby.
Yeah, and I think it's not super hard to acquire him right now. And I think once you get in the season, it won't shock anybody if he's a top 12 running back because of the bankable volume that he gets. And he was super efficient last year because he can break 1 million tackles. So we're kind of all in on Dameon Pierce, not only in your rebuilding leagues, but just in general. I think that's one of our biggest takeaways from the offseason. Every running back is a sell this year, except for maybe Dameon Pierce.
Yeah. And one other guy that I want to give a shout out to, but
we'll get to him
after this quick break. Yeah.
All right. I want to talk about another running back that I'm buying in all formats next. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or you're scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you with the players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So with draft prep underway for the upcoming season, let's see who Vinny has picked out for us in this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. This week, it's Garrett Wilson. Are you looking for a second-year fantasy football wide receiver who can drive your team to big points while he catches on with a new starting quarterback. Garrett Wilson is a guaranteed fit with Aaron Rodgers as he is ready to build on his rookie season. Watch for Wilson to make big plays all over the field with his speed, quickness, and route running. We absolutely love Garrett Wilson. He's going to smash this year. Vinny Iyer from Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows that a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. The same is true with your vehicle. With eBay Guaranteed Fit and over 122 million parts and accessories for your vehicle right at your fingertips, you can make sure that your ride stays running smoothly. Air filters, brakes, batteries, tail lights, shocks, struts, you name it, eBay Motors has it. And they'll make sure it's the right fit for your car because eBay Guaranteed Fit helps you understand exactly what parts you need for your vehicle the first time. So go forth, switch gears, crank that AC, and say goodbye to sweating if your ride needs a little fixing up, because now you know you'll always be set up for success from the get-go. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, everything your vehicle needs is just a click away. For the parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com, and let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, exclusions apply. All right, we are back here in the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Everydayers, Kate and I will be back tomorrow to talk about some wide receivers that you should be trying to go out and trade for if you are in a rebuild mode or you just need to tear your team down a little bit. So make sure you tune in for that. But Kate, a running back that I want to go out and get is Brian Robinson. I'm going to give my case why I like Brian Robinson, but what are just your initial reactions on the second-year Commanders running back?
I'm not overly hyped. Now, that's not to say that the talent isn't there. That's not to say that the circumstances surrounding his rookie season couldn't have played a role in what we saw. But generally, I'm hesitant on the Commanders' offense in general outside of Sam Howell. So I'm going to need you to do a little work here and help me get there, Marcus. Help me buy into Brian Robinson as the perfect rebuilding running back.
First of all, I think the talent is really good. He ranked 80 in the 83rd percentile in missed tackles forced per attempt, according to PFF, both in the receiving and the run game. And I know the receiving game is not great. Over the last 7 games, he caught 5 passes for 53 yards. Like he's not a receiver. And I understand that. And that's one of the things that you're going to have to get over. However, the price tag is so cheap that I'm okay with him not being a big asset in the receiving game. Like it doesn't cost a lot to go out and get him. He's RB 38. But last year, Kate, again, final 7 games after he was like kind of fully healthy. Because remember, he was shot in the preseason. He got shot in the leg. I was surprised that he even played at all. Missed the first 4 games of the season. But in the final 7 games, he averaged over 20 touches per game. I just don't know if Antonio Gibson is going to be the answer there. I think Brian Robinson's going to be the guy that's the first and second down back that gets the short yardage work. And I think this offense has a pretty good chance to be much better than it was last year with Eric Bieniemy. And if I don't have to pay top 35 prices, I'm kind of in on Brian Robinson, a second-year back from Alabama. And we've seen like some of these Alabama backs take a couple years in the NFL before they really break out. Look at Josh Jacobs with the Raiders. I'm buying Brian Robinson going into year 2.
I think that's fair. I definitely think that's fair. And I think maybe one of my biggest points of hesitancy comes from the lack of usage as a receiver. And that the fact that like not just the usage from last season, right? It's also all the hype that we're hearing this offseason about the involvement and potential involvement of Antonio Gibson as like
do you buy it
in this passing game. I actually do.
Okay.
For a group of fantasy football players who have been so invested in Antonio Gibson as a running back, I thought, like, I'm going to be honest, it felt like such a weird miss by his coaching staff up to this point that he wasn't more involved as a receiver. Last year, coming off of career highs in targets, I think he ranked like 8th in PFF receiving grade among running backs. Was really good. And you know what? Suddenly that makes sense because don't forget, he's a converted wide receiver coming out of Memphis. And the fact, like, I get, he was, a fun, transition from the wide receiver to the running back position. But like, let's not forget that was the natural skill set that kind of, popped eyes to begin with, even though he did make that transition. Like, let's start to emphasize that skill set and his background, paired with, the coaching staff and Eric Bieniemy, like all of these things, I think have me a little bit more bought into Antonio Gibson, just for his upside. Now, obviously he's older, has more experience, but
last year in his rookie contract, right?
still doesn't, like it, lots of question marks there, especially with the current running back market. Like, do you want to invest in a running back? I feel like it's a dangerous time to invest in a running back on the final year of his rookie contract, period. But
So here's my thoughts, Kate, is I think the way that the Commanders, especially Ron Rivera, want to win football games is they want to lean on their defense. And we think it's going to be Sam Howell that's probably going to be the starting quarterback with a fifth round pick at quarterback. I think they're just going to want to play like a ball control style offense. And, like ideally try to win games like 20-17, which I think they can do because their defense is incredible. I just think Brian Robinson can kind of be that grinder. In fact, I look at him like he's like the discount version of Najee Harris to me, like somebody that's going to get a lot of touches on a ball control style offense that really wants to take the air out of the football. And with, again, if I told you right now that Brian Robinson is going to average 19.7 carries per game, there's almost just no way he doesn't finish as a top 20 running back with that type of bankable volume. So I love that he's a young player who's still ascending, who's 100% healthy now in an offense that I think could be significantly better than it was last year.
Yeah, I definitely, I understand the game, the idea that this is how they want to play the game. Like, I get it. I think there's a lot of potential value there. For me to be all in, I need to see more involvement as a receiver. I don't know if it's going to happen, but if it does, yes, he is going to be a huge value, I think, in fantasy drafts. And I mean, I don't want to beat this point over the head, but it's really nice to have a running back on your roster that's got a little bit of time left on his rookie deal.
Sure.
So you don't have to deal with this mess.
3 years, right? 3 years.
Yeah, you've got 3 years left, and you don't have to deal with what is current. Like, I mean, we've seen it happen even with like J.K. Dobbins, who has really no negotiating power here whatsoever. Even he's going through these motions, entering the final year of it. Like, we're seeing this across the league. So to see a young running back in a offense that wants to run the ball, wants to control the clock, I get the merits.
Yeah. So there's one trade on Dynasty League football that I really liked, that I think if you're a rebuilding team that you would have to consider. It's Derrick Henry for Brian Robinson and a 2024 second round pick. Like, that's an ideal trade for me.
See, I feel like I'd want more.
Okay.
I feel like I'd want more. And like for Derrick Henry, I know it's Dynasty, but like, I don't know. Can I get Dameon Pierce instead of a Brian Robinson? Am I asking too much?
I mean, I would prefer that as well. You might be asking a little bit too much, but there's no reason not to try for that, right?
I like it, even if we have to bump it down to like Dameon Pierce in a third. I would rather get that done for a player that I think has more upside than Robinson, but I don't hate it.
I'll give you another one. Here's a really interesting one for me. Brian Robinson and a 2024 first round pick for Ramondre Stevenson. Stevenson is going into Stevenson's going into year 3, I believe, with the Patriots. He's going to get absolutely fed this year. But if I can pick up a first round pick down the road and get a running back that I think has at least some RB2 upside, I think that's a good trade for me, even though the age of Stevenson and Brian Robinson is very comparable.
I think it's a pretty good segue to the next running back we're going to talk about.
A certain guy out in New England, because we know the Patriots love to throw the ball. Let's talk about that running back next. All right, Kay, this is one I'm really excited about. You texted me about this player this morning, and when it popped up, I was thrilled because I also like Pierre Strong of the New England Patriots. Why is he one of your rebuilding running back targets?
He is such an interesting player, Marcus, because like I'm doing research on the New England Patriots, right? And there's one running back whose name just keeps popping up like over and over and over again at the top of like all of these advanced metrics. And it's Pierre Strong, who spent last season, his rookie season, with a very limited workload, had just 10 total rushing attempts in the season. Guess what? Still finished with 100 yards, averaging 10 yards per carry, which was freaking absurd. The yes, he's going to play behind Ramondre Stevenson, who had a good season, was very involved as a route runner. But I think the moves from the New England Patriots have indicated that they're not 100% sold on Ramondre Stevenson. They've hosted, the Leonard Fournette, Ezekiel Elliott, like all of these running backs that have been big names have all been kind of in consideration for the New England Patriots. And though that may look like they're signaling outside of Pierre Strong, I keep going back to just what we saw out of Strong in his rookie season. We're looking at a guy that I think, in redraft leagues, not even being drafted based on current ADP, but really shined in his like very limited opportunities. 0.3 missed forced tackles per attempt. That was tied for the 9th highest missed forced tackle rate, an 83.8 rushing grade on PFF that ranked 17th among running backs. That was just 4 spots behind Ramondre Stevenson, who was the starting running back. He's a speedy, elite top end guy. Like once the dude hits the open field, you're not going to catch him. In fact, like the majority, which, you don't often see it, I think 70% of his total rushing yards came before contact, which is absolutely absurd. I believe it led all the running backs in the league with at least 10 rushing attempts. Like this guy, you couldn't touch him. And once he forces that initial misforced tackle, he's gone. Just based on that speed there. I think that there's a lot of room. We know that Bill Belichick likes to rotate through these running backs. Even the draft capital, not all that different from Ramondre Stevenson. We had Strong drafted 127th overall in the 2022 draft. Ramondre Stevenson drafted 120th overall in 2021, just 7 spots different here. I just don't see as big a gap between Stevenson and Strong as you might think outside of like their build. Stevenson's a much bigger back. But this might be an opportunity for Strong to, carve out the James White role.
And you know how valuable that passing back role has been for the Patriots over the last decade and a half, right? We can go through the names, right? James White, Danny Woodhead, Shane Vereen, Kevin Falk, like all of these players have had value, even standalone value in PPR leagues because of that role. And I think with Mac Jones, or if it's Bailey Zappi, whoever's at quarterback, neither of those guys are mobile. So they're going to throw the ball to the running backs a lot. Somebody's going to have to be the passing down back there because Ramondre Stevenson is a good receiver. He's a very good receiver, but they can't keep him on the field for every single snap. Somebody's going to have to step up. I think Pierre Strong probably has the best chance of being the next James White in New England.
Yeah, like the size, again, leaves like a little bit to be desired there, but ranked 95th in percentile for 40-yard dash, 91st percentile in his 10-yard split, 70th percentile vertical, 83rd broad jump. Like this is a stellar athlete. Yes. So like what he lacks in size, he definitely makes up for with that athleticism. It's just really, it's really hard not to look at him and see a very viable option for this team's RB2 when it's clear based on their actions that they're not necessarily all in on Ramondre Stevenson.
Yeah, and I think even if they are all in on Ramondre, they've got to find somebody else who complements him. And I think Pierre Strong is that guy. And right now, the best part about it, Kate, it basically costs you nothing to find out, right? Pierce Strong is being drafted. I mean, he's in most leagues, he's not even being drafted RB 56, which means you can go pick him up a lot of times in your waivers right now, stash him on the back of your roster and just find out or wait and find out, see what happens. If it ends up being somebody else, you cut him, no big deal. And even if you've got to trade a late round pick to go get him, I think he's somebody that's worth gambling on. So we're completely in alignment here. Go out, trade for Dameon Pierce. If you're like me, go out and get Brian Robinson as well. Stack those two running backs, but make sure that you have Pierce Strong at the back end of your dynasty roster because he certainly could pay off for you in your PPR leagues. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. Again, everydayers, we will be back tomorrow to talk about some receivers that you should be going out and targeting if you are in rebuild mode. So make sure you tune in for that. We are free and available on all platforms. Go check us out on YouTube. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at